May I have your attention, please, ladies and gentlemen? We will begin with our program exactly at 6:30 p.m. And in the meanwhile, I request everyone to please enjoy a very refreshing cup of tea. Thank you.
Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3. Check, check.
May I have your attention, please? We are about to begin our program in a few minutes. I request everyone to kindly be seated. We are about to begin shortly, ladies and gentlemen. It is about time, ladies and gentlemen. I once again request everyone to kindly take your seats. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this unique dialogue on citizens, constitution, and law. This interface has been organized in commemoration of the completion of 78 years of the Shillong Times, which has been an integral part of Shillong since the 10th of August, 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, we are highly honored to have with us this evening Srimati Vrinda Grover. She is one of the topmost lawyers of the Supreme Court of India. And she will have a dialogue with you on citizens, constitution, and law. I invite Srimati Patricia Mukhim, editor, The Shillong Times, and Srimati Shobha Chaudhary, publisher, The Shillong Times, to kindly escort our distinguished guest onto the dais. Next, I invite the former editor and currently the managing director of the Shillong Times, Padma Shri Manas Chaudhary, to escort noted thinker and educationist Dr. Glenn Kharkongor to the dais. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Glenn Kharkongor, Chancellor, Martin Luther Christian University. And I request the gentlemen to kindly take their seats on the dais. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as we stand here to honor our esteemed guest, Srimati Vrinda Grover, I invite Srimati Shobha Chaudhary, who graces the dais, to lead the felicitation, assisted by Padma Shri Patricia Mukhim and Padma Shri Manas Chaudhary, embodying the collective appreciation that we have for Srimati Vrinda Grover. I request the ladies to kindly come forward with the plaque and the memento. And now, presentation of the gifts and the mementos, ladies and gentlemen, to Srimati Vrinda Grover. May I once again request Srimati Shobha Chaudhary and Padma Shri Manas Chaudhary to recognize the presence of Dr. Glenn Kharkongor and Padma Shri Patricia Mukhim.
As much to our editor's reluctance, we can't help recognizing her as an anchor here, not as editor of the paper. So,
Thank you. Now, may I request Padma Shri Manas Chaudhary to deliver his warm welcome address, setting the stage for what promises to be a wonderful gathering. Kindly, sir.
Mrs. Vrinda Grover, or the numero the first among equals here today. She is the reason why we are all here. She has given us a reason to celebrate our citizenship, our constitution, and our life. I think today, as we mark the beginning of 79th year of journey of Shillong Times, it's a pleasure to have an eminent lawyer like her to come and grace the occasion. When in the Shillong Times we were discussing whom should we call, you won't believe the first time ever we didn't have to rack our brain too much. It was one point stop. Name proposed and sanctioned by everybody. Vrinda Grover has such popularity and acceptance. Popularity not in the political sense, but as a lawyer, as a conscience keeper, as a person who upholds law and the morality of law, the morality of constitution, as a TV personality, as a civil rights activist. She wears many hats. But for us, she's a citizen who speaks for citizens. It's wonderful having you over. I'm sure this will be an evening well spent. I want to welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen. The citizens first. We didn't want a large crowd. We wanted a quantity of quality. And we are so happy that the discerning readers of the Shillong Times are here. Because Shillong Times doesn't exist because somebody wants to publish it. It doesn't exist because an editor wants to write something. It exists because the readers like you want something every day, something new, some food for thought. So thank you for making this event, making it possible to be here today. We have very eminent people here. I don't want to name too many people because when you name one and you leave out another, it leaves a very bad taste. I don't want to name. Everybody is equal here, as I said, and therefore, hearty welcome to this program. Before I go on to speak a little bit about Shillong Times, let me just tell you how this program will pan out. We will have a brief presentation. Vrinda tells me that she will make a very brief presentation. She's not good at lecturing. I said, we don't want lecturing. Speak your mind out. Speak on the topic. Introduce and titillate us. Provoke us to think and question her. So that she will do. I think we'll give her about 10 minutes. And then we have two able anchors. Apart from editor Patricia, we have Dr. Glenn Kirkonger, who's an educationist, who's a thinker, who's a doer, who does everything. So we would expect them to raise a few issues of their choice. And after they're done with, and I want to say that we don't want too many questions from you. We leave it to the audience, leave it to the people here, because they won't get a chance to meet Vrinda again like this. You will see her on television, and she doesn't come on television too many times these days, because her tone and tenor doesn't go well with the anchors. So therefore, she is not very much a favorite of many of the anchors. I want to say a little bit about the Shillong Times. I think the anchor mentioned 1945, and I was not born in 45. Most of us were not. I've been 30 years I handle the Shillong Times on my shoulders. I can narrate my own experience of what it takes to bring out a paper, an English paper which is read by everybody across the board, in a state which is new, in a community which is restless for so many things. And we also have a very fragile law and order situation. Now there the newspapers are always inviting trouble. I want to say that we've had lots of trials and tribulations. But a few things I want to share with you that I have never told anybody, most people may not know. That perhaps we are the only newspaper in the world that was subjected to a ban by a pressure group. You can't sell the paper in the market. The boys went out, stopped our vehicle from giving out the papers to the hawkers and others. Hawkers were threatened. If you buy Shillong Times, you are finished. There was a time when our Tura office was gherraud for 15 long days. Why? Because we carried a story which didn't go well with one of the NGOs. NGO is not the right word, pressure group. And they gherraud our Tura office, not allowing our staff, not allowing our vehicle carrying the paper to enter. This was the second instance. The third instance was during the COVID. We were the only newspaper in the entire world, only not newspaper, any media house. COVID time, life must have stopped everywhere. But did it stop media? The televisions beamed their programs, newspapers came out. Of course, there was less circulation, but they never stopped publication. Shillong Times was forced to close down by an executive order for 1 week. What was the reason? 2 of our chaps got COVID infection. And that was the reason why order was passed and we were stopped going into the office. Journalists not allowed, nobody was allowed. Paper was stopped for 7 days. For me, it was like missing 7 heartbeats. I want to say that nobody could help in a pandemic situation where the government takes certain actions over which we have nobody has any control. But on 2 occasions, I was so happy, and that's what I want to tell you today, that in Tura and in Shillong, when our roads were blocked, it's not me, it's not us, it's not police, it's not politicians. It's the people. The citizens rose up. They said, no, you cannot stop. We want the paper. We want to read. Now, the point I'm trying to make, the strength of the citizens, if the rise is one, anything can happen. I want to say today that today's first word in this is citizens. We have put citizens above everything. Even the Constitution begins as we the citizens. We are the real owners of this country or the state or the place wherever we are. But we are not exerting our rights as we should. That's a different matter. We will be coming to that a little later. I want to also refer to 1945, a history not much known. When Shillong Times was born in 1945, 10th of August, if you recall, 10th of August was also the birthday of United Nations. It's a coincidence, not a design, that we share common birthday. But how did it begin? I asked the founder editor, Shudhindra Bhushan Chaudhary, Shudhin Babu, used to be called by all sections of people. Those days, undivided Assam, 1945. Naga leaders, Mizo leaders, Khasi leaders, Garo leaders, name them. They would all come to Shudhin Babu. Now, why would they come to him? In 1945, when the British was about to leave the country, and India was in a twilight zone, the tribes of the Northeast had trepidation They were not sure which way to go. There was no leadership. There was no organizational strength. There was no communication means. The tribes were all isolated and living in the backwaters as they were. And they wanted some say in the Constituent Assembly. Of course, we had representative. But it was important that they get some publicity mechanism. There were, those days in 45 and later, the Calcutta dailies would be the papers that would come to Shillong, if you remember, even to Assam. Statesman and Hindustan Standard, Amrita Bazaar, all those papers ruled the roost in Northeast. The Calcutta papers had no space for the people of the region, especially the tribes. Assam Tribune, which used to be the largest and most prominent newspaper, even today it is, for reasons best known to them, they did not give any weightage to the tribal cause. And especially because the tribals were seeking separation from Assam, obviously Assam would not support. So the tribes never got any support from Calcutta or Guwahati. And here was Shillong Times, which came handy to them, not because Mr. Shuddin Chaudhary was interested in selling his paper. Don't get me wrong. Because he had a genuine love and concern for the tribes. He had given Shillong Times, and you'd be very surprised to know, he told me this, that Captain Sangma, the first Chief Minister of Meghalaya, was the selling agent of Shillong Times in Garo Hills. John Dang Porman, P.R. Kindia, Nicole Sroy, a few names that I remember, used to write those days in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They used to write in the Shillong Times, contribute. Now, the reason what I'm trying to tell you all this is that that history is not known to today's world. That the tribes needed support, and here was Shillong Times. And here was the editor who had a great empathy. Those days, the forlorn tribes of the Northeast. Imagine the undivided Assam. Undivided Assam, the tribes did not enjoy any protection, no constitutional protection. And here was Shillong Times that gave them coverage, their aspiration. The newspaper has to be people's voice, must reflect the truth. And that's what they did in the formative years. It becomes a little complex later, especially after Meghalaya came into being. It was not very easy to say the whole truth. I have to be candid that you have to be diplomatic in order to make a point. Make a point, but don't make an enemy. But that's not saying too much. So that's the kind of a situation we were caught in this kind of a bind. But Shillong Times has always been espousing the truth fearlessly. We have had, Vrinda, for your knowledge, at least one chief minister resigned because of us. At least 3 ministers resigned because of us. I mean, that's good enough. I mean, I think for a newspaper of our magnitude, if we had caused this kind of a small tremor, I think we have done enough. But the trend must continue. The job of the newspaper is different, not to write about what the chief minister says and what the opposition says. I mean, that's routine, that's nothing. So it's not easy. Every day you don't get that kind of a material. But what I'm saying is, we are very happy as we celebrate the 78th birthday, and we are 2 days behind schedule because Vrinda is a busy person. She's one of the most busiest lawyers in Delhi. And it's not easy to get a date from her. So we are so happy that you have come. And I'm so happy that you are here to listen to her. And I'm so happy I could unburden myself a bit. Thank you very much, and wonderful having you over. Welcome once again.
Thank you, sir, for that weighty address. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a very pleasant task at hand. We are going to recognize and acknowledge the contributions of our esteemed columnists. Over the decades, our esteemed columnists have contributed to the Shillong Times, and that has made the newspaper one of the most sought after. And I have the privilege of reading out the names of our esteemed columnists who are seated in the hall, and I request Padma Shri Patricia Mukhim and Srimati Shobha Chaudhary to kindly present the mementos and the gifts to our esteemed columnist as I mention their names one by one and also take an opportunity to read a few lines about them. To begin with, Shri Toki Bla. Ladies and gentlemen, Shri Toki Bla, former civil servant turned social worker who started the organization Informed, Conscious and Responsible Existence. True to the cause, he keeps a sharp eye on politics, society, and churns out articles that are laced with humor, but are hard-hitting as well. He has been contributing to the Shillong Times for at least a decade. Next in the list is Srimati Uma Prakaista, but I believe Srimati Uma Prakaista is not in our midst due to ill health, but I would like to read out a few lines about her. Srimati Uma Prakaista, a regular contributor to the Shillong Times for over 3 decades. She retired as the headmistress of Shillong Government Girls High School and has been a prolific writer in Bengali as well as in English. She has written books on Tagore, on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, with particular reference to this beautiful hill station, Shillong. She has been contributing, as I said, as I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, to the Shillong Times, articles for more than over 3 decades now. And if I'm not mistaken, Srimati Uma Prakaista is an octogenarian. Next, it is Dr. Yes, I can see Ma'am Rita Ghosh present here. Can I please request you, ma'am, to receive the gifts and the mementos on behalf of Srimati Uma Prakaista? Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together for the octogenarian who's not present here due to her ill health this evening. Thank you, Madam Rita Ghosh. Next is Dr. Sumarben Umdor. Dr. Sumarben Umdor. Dr. Sumarben Umdor is also not present here. Can anyone from NEHU please receive it on behalf of Dr. Sumarben Umdor? Anyone? Please receive. Thank you. And Dr. Umdor teaches economics at the Northeastern Hill University, but he's also involved with several institutions guiding them in their economic goals. He contributes his views on the socio-economic status of Meghalaya, the region at large and country, and he has been doing this for over a decade, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir, for receiving it on behalf of Dr. Sumarben Umdor. Next in the order, we have Dr. Benjamin Lingdo. Dr. Benjamin Lingdo. He teaches tourism management at the Northeastern Hill University. However, he's a sharp political commentator and shares valuable insights into what ails Meghalaya. And mainly is writing about society and politics. And he also has been contributing to the Shillong Times for at least a decade now. Next we have Shri H. Hamkeng Mormen. Shri H. Hamkeng Mormen. Shri Hamkeng Mormen, ladies and gentlemen, has come all the way from Juai. We are highly grateful, sir. Mr. Mormen combines many qualities. He's a pastor of the Unitarian Church, a scholar historian, author, social worker, and he has been sharing his valuable views through the Shillong Times with all of us for nearly 2 decades now. Next, I invite Reverend Father Albert Therniang. Okay, Reverend Father Therniang is not here. I'll just read out about him. A very regular and esteemed contributor, ladies and gentlemen. A Catholic priest, a school administrator who shoots from the hip and never shies away from calling a spade a spade. He is a critic of the socio-political religious issues of our times, ladies and gentlemen. And he writes extensively on these issues in the Shillong Times. Next, I invite Reverend Father Dr. Barnes Mauri. Dr. Barnes Mauri, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Mauri is a priest of the Salesian order and an author of repute who has to his credit 9 books, ladies and gentlemen. His book, The Khasis and Their Natural Environment, is highly acclaimed and read by those desirous of understanding the Khasi people. He has been immensely contributing to the Shillong Times for the last 2 decades. Next, I invite Shri Avner Medon Pariat. Shri Avner Medon Pariat, ladies and gentlemen. He is a writer and public provocateur. He has worked with the organizations like Doordarshan, Facebook, and has been in numerous residencies abroad, like Literature Across Frontiers and Pro-Helvetia. He has a deep interest in history and literature and is especially interested in questions pertaining to the origin and future of Khasi people. May I now invite Dr. Lakhon Kumar. Dr. Lakhon Kumar. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kumar teaches biochemistry and he did his postdoctoral research from the Medical College of Wisconsin, USA. Besides other achievements, Dr. Kumar takes special interest in politics and educational scenario of Meghalaya, and he writes on critical issues facing Meghalaya. Next in the order is Dr. Omar Lin Kindia. Dr. Omar Lin Kindia. Ladies and gentlemen, a historian teaching the subject in St. Edmund's College. He writes on issues related to tradition and the indigenous faith, and he helps in understanding the underlying cultural nuances of religious celebration, especially of the Pinar people of our state. He has been contributing articles and letters to the Shillong Times for a long time. Last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bhaktaram Mauro. Dr. Bhaktaram Mauro, a scholar activist, and a keen observer of Meghalaya's politics, vis-a-vis what happens in the rest of the country. He's associated with NESFAS, an NGO working in the area of indigenous people as conservators of biodiversity. He has been immensely contributing to the Shillong Times for over a decade now, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, let's put our hands together for all of us present here, and of course for our esteemed columnists, because we all are avid readers of the Shillong Times. Waking up in the morning, the first thing that we are reminded is, has the Shillong Times been delivered? Thank you. I now invite Padma Shri Patricia Mukhim to the podium as we eagerly await her words of introduction for our distinguished guest, Srimati Vrinda Grover. Kindly, ma'am.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and friends. Vrinda has warned me not to make a long intro. I'm just going to give snippets. It's a great honor and privilege to be introducing a person whose name will, in time, be part of the annals of judicial history in India. I'm sure that those of us who watch TV panel discussions have seen the lady argue her points meticulously and fearlessly. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I feel truly proud and privileged to be introducing to you a name we are all familiar with, Vrinda Grover. Think human rights and women's right defender, and Vrinda's name crops up. In the courtroom, we have seen her arguing vociferously on behalf of the weak and downtrodden, and getting relief on their behalf. So let's get to the formal introduction. Vrinda graduated in history from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and I'm glad that you joined law and did law from the Delhi University, and then later on her master's from New York University, master's in law. Besides being, as we call her, a sharp legal eagle, Vrinda is a researcher and human rights activist. As a lawyer, she specializes in constitutional law, criminal law, human rights, and has appeared in several landmark cases. She has also contributed to the drafting of laws to protect women and children from violence. Vrinda's research and writing probes impunity for human rights violations by the state. In 2018, she was conferred an honorary degree by the SOAS University of London in recognition of her contribution to the area of human rights and civil liberties. Currently, she is on the United Nations Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry into War Crimes in the Ukraine conflict. I think that's a great place to be in. Vrinda has represented women and child survivors of domestic and sexual violence victims and survivors of communal massacres, extrajudicial killings and custodial torture, sexual minorities, trade unions, and political activists. In 2013, the Time magazine identified her as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. I think we are very, very honored to have Vrinda here. I am not going to read out the full text in deference to her wishes so that she has more time to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, ma'am. From here, ladies and gentlemen, the dialogue will be carried forward by Padma Shri Patricia Mukhim and Dr. Glenn Karkungor.
Good evening, friends. This is truly an honor, a privilege, and a very humbling moment, especially when the columnists were being honored, and Dr. Glenn was kind enough to tell me about each one of them. Because even though one heard what their, what work they were doing or what their area of interest was, a little bit more insight I heard from Dr. Glenn, and it was actually amazing the kind of rich understanding, insights, knowledge there is in this room. I come from Delhi, where we don't have gatherings like this. There is a cross-section of people who are concerned about Meghalaya, who are all present here from their different walks of life, which is what we require in any democratic space. We don't have such conversations. Each one is having conversations in silos, and it's not just certain groups. Everybody is having conversations in silos, and therefore, without hearing each other, we are really not moving forward or moving in a direction that is perhaps important for us as a country, as a people. Also, listening to Manas tell us about the history of the Shillong Times is truly inspiring. For a newspaper to continue to do what newspapers are meant to do, what journalists are meant to do, why it's called the fourth pillar of democracy, and to take pride in it is becoming increasingly rare. And therefore, to come here and be inspired is something that I would want to thank you for. I also want to put on record here my ignorance. I do not know Meghalaya. I do not know the states of Northeast. I do not know about the issues with which you grapple, whether they are issues relating to tribal life and all interconnected issues. I do not know about them. Sometimes I feel maybe the government also doesn't know about them. But that is for you to assess. We get away with our ignorance. It's not even labeled as ignorance. Not knowing about populations, peoples, regions of this country is not considered something that is lacking in our comprehension, and yet we can be policy makers, lawyers, judges, ministers, everything, without knowing very much. When Patricia got ready this evening to come here, and of course she was wearing this beautiful jensam, and I asked her to confirm that, is this the dress? Because my ignorance, which I have put on record here, which in a way means there's so much more to learn, so that's something to look forward to and to engage with. And why did I ask her that particular question? There is a case going on in the Delhi High Court in which two of my petitioners are sitting here. One is Patricia and the other is Sanjoy Hazarika. Because the ignorance is not just mere ignorance that I will sit with Dr. Glenn and he'll tell me a few things, then that ignorance is going to be rid of. That ignorance leads to prejudice. That ignorance leads to discrimination. That ignorance leads to othering. And that ignorance leads to violence. Kong Thailand, taking lunch at the Gymkhana Club, invited as a guest. You are fortunate. You learnt equality at home, where people who work and help you run the home, help you rear your children, are given a seat at the dining table. In northern India, from where I come, all manner of issues of caste, complete disrespect for labor. We don't share a meal. We share it only with those who are like us. That's part of the problem. Kong Thailand was asked to leave because the rules said, and the employees said she looks like a maid. And they felt she looks like a Nepali maid. Of course, the discrimination is coming from her appearance and from her attire, which we don't know of. Of course, we see them, if there was a tribal festival, some floats on Republic Day, then we'll see people wearing, but we see these as costumes. We don't see them as dress, as attire. Fortunately, the people who she had come with took that as a collective insult, did not ask her to leave the table so that they could continue enjoying their lunch, and said this is an issue where her dignity has been assaulted. And Kong Thailand and these other friends asked me to file a writ petition in the Delhi High Court suing Golf Club, which I did. And it is always an honor to represent people who want to try and inject into our lives what is written in the Constitution. Article 15 says there will be no discrimination on the grounds of place of birth, language, etc., etc. There was a lot of resistance from the golf club. The matter has been going on forever. The incident is about 6 years old now. We are still at the final arguments, but that's the wheels of the legal system. The golf club was asked to amend its rules by a committee they only set up. Very interestingly, they amended the rules, which they placed before the court. I'm sorry to take up this kind of time, but I think it's interesting to know. And they said, not only will they call them MDE, members domestic employees, not only will MDEs not sit in certain areas, which is their original rule, but because here Kong Thailand actually came in as a guest. She was signed in as a guest. She was invited as a guest. She did not come in as an MDE. So they've added a new rule. You cannot sign in MDEs as guests. This is the Delhi Golf Club, the elite, the intelligentsia. Judges are members of this. There are a certain number of judges who automatically can get membership. Land is given by the government of India, by the ministry. And the clause just after that is about how dogs and other animals will not be permitted. This is the 75th year of Indian independence. Apart from that, if I may, Manas and Patricia, being a bold press, they run into skirmishes with the law, which they should. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing their job well. So Patricia puts up a Facebook post which somebody doesn't like, and before you know it, she has a criminal case against her. And then the rest of the story most of you know. And then I moved the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court not only quashed the FIR, but actually gave a judgment which is today, it is in Patricia's name, which is cited repeatedly in different courts today as a judgment passed by Justice Nageshwar Rao and Justice Ravindra Bhatt, which made it clear that free speech should not be curtailed because you don't like what the other person is saying. And you can't abuse the law and weaponize the law. And I will talk a little bit about weaponization of the law. And we need to, I know we have the DGP here, but I think law and order is something else. And law is something else. And constitution and citizens are the umbilical cord is tied between the citizen and the constitution, and the law needs to fall in line with that. That FIR was quashed. It's a judgment worth reading. And of course, there was a challenge to the sedition provision, which again is a legacy of colonial law. By the way, it's not gone away. There's some confusion that has been generated. It's very much there. In fact, it's in a slightly more dangerous avatar, if I may say so. We'll talk about that also. In the name of two women editors, Patricia Mukhim and Anuradha Bhasin, we challenged the sedition provision, and it has been stayed. The use of sedition as an offense, as in to lodge an FIR or prosecute anyone, any citizen of this country, has been stayed by the Supreme Court. We now have 3 new legislations with amendments that have been brought in, which we have still to be passed by Parliament. So we need to see how that sedition, simply removing a word here and there doesn't matter. You can renumber provisions and you can change the nomenclature, what is at the heart of the offense and how does it encroach upon fundamental rights is really the test that every legislation is required to go through. So it doesn't matter that there is no, the murder section is changed or sedition is now in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sahita is today section 150. That doesn't matter. We need to examine the content of it. The challenge by the 2 women editors, and again, as I say, it was a matter of pride to represent them, both working in very different and difficult areas, both heading newspapers which have courageously spoken, and I here do want to congratulate the Shillong Times, which must be one of the only few newspapers across the country, I don't know, you can correct me, where 2 women are running the newspaper, not because their families own the paper. We have those, that's all right. But because they have been asked by the paper to, on merit, to run their paper, and I think that's very exceptional, and we need to acknowledge the Shillong Times for that too. I will just take a few more minutes to say what is, it's very interesting when we talk about, there is a, and I put this deliberately in my bio, I enjoy being provocative. There is no difficulty in that. And I think provocation is very important for us to think, because there is no point living in a democracy if we are just going to generally be good. The state should be good, actually, always. The word activist, how can that word be an add-on after citizen? If you're a citizen, you are an activist. You have to be. To not perform that activism is actually a breach of your duty and a waste of being in a democracy. But what is this democracy and what is the citizen constitution relationship? The citizen is at the heart of the Constitution, as is Chapter 3. The Constitution talks of many things, allocation of power, role of the 3 organs, various other things which every state, in order to run, those rules need to be prescribed, powers need to be allocated. But it is to Chapter 3 that I want to focus my attention, because I think we are increasingly altering the terms of the relationship between the citizen and the state. When we became independent from feudal eras of being slave to subject to citizen, if that is where we are today, since 1947, we are citizens, it is not my only duty to go and cast a vote. That is one of the things we do. If you don't feel like doing, if you think there's no good candidate, that is really up to the person, the individual citizen. The Constitution, Chapter 3, places brakes controls, and what the state cannot do, how power cannot be exercised. That is the reason we have a constitution. The constitution is not there for us to, whenever there is international criticism, global criticism, United Nations raises a few queries to say we have a constitution. We have a constitution because people of India fought for independence, and people like Baba Sahib Ambedkar knew that this country needed inscribing equality because it will not happen otherwise. Recognizes that citizens are not equally placed and that they are at a disadvantage on grounds of caste, class, place of birth, gender, religion, ethnicity. And that is why the Constitution becomes the sword of the citizen. It is not a shield of the state as it is being increasingly used. To keep saying, oh, we have a constitution, so don't ask us any questions, is not what a state is allowed to do. The relationship between the citizen and the state is the state's accountability, not the citizens. And rights and duties are not joined at the hip. This is increasingly being said. The minute you talk of rights, but what are your duties? My rights and state's duties. That is the equation. That is the equation the Constitution envisages. The state will want to change it. Anybody in power will want to change it. It's not peculiar to one regime. This part of the country has seen this for longer than we have, which we will have to today reset as citizens. And where does law come in all this? So this is not a triangle. It's not citizen, constitution, law. The citizen and the constitution are together. And the constitution holds the citizen, and the citizen and the constitution are interlocked. But the law can only emanate from the constitution, which it doesn't, and that's why it gets challenged, like the sedition provision, which does not come from the constitution. In fact, it's very interesting. When we got our constitution, the Indian Penal Code was not revisited. We have many colonial offenses. Why was it not revisited? Let me give the example of one which is my favorite because I did some work on it. There is a section called Section 197, with all due respect to all public servants here. There is a section called Section 197 in the Code of Criminal Procedure. It used to be called Servants of the Crown. It gives a buffer for good reason. I'm not totally opposed to the section, I'm just mentioning it here. That nobody can file litigation cases against a public servant without taking permission of the state. It was altered only to remove servants of the crown and add public servants. Is that the only change that happened in 1950 when we got a constitution? I totally agree with the government. This penal code is colonial. Please pick up the penal code and see, which is the smallest chapter. At least it was. I haven't studied the new one. It came only yesterday. The smallest chapter in the Indian Penal Code are offenses by the state. If the Constitution is all about curbs and checks on the arbitrary power of the state, and if our experience in 75 years does show, and there is a judicial record, I'm not making this up, of the state abusing the power, using the power to infringe, tamper, encroach upon our rights, then surely that accountability should be reflected in the penal code. But it isn't. Does the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sahita make that shift? I'm not sure, but that's a conversation that will commence now. The law, when I joined to study law, it was because I really did believe that it was an instrument through which issues of workers' rights, women's rights, those who were more underprivileged, one could agitate and take the cause further. Today, I don't see the law like that. Today, the law, instead of being an enabling instrument, has become an instrument of oppression. I think this region of the Northeast has experiences of AFSPA, etc., which has always perhaps been in that segment. But insofar as weaponization of the law is today concerned, I do not recall, but there are people here with more experience, insights, and memories. When have we last seen the weaponization of law, where the law becomes yet another weapon in the arsenal of the state? That is not the purpose of law. But it is. We fear to speak our mind. We fear to do things. Why has the weaponization of law taken place, and what are we going to do about it? And is it the job of any agent of the state to enforce that law? And therefore, I'm saying law and order is a very state-centric concept. Will we re-examine law and order in a constitutional democracy from the perspective of citizens? I'll stop here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I think it nicely sets the tone for the rest of the evening. We've noted your disclaimer about knowledge about the Northeast. So I did have a few questions pertaining to the Northeast, but we'll make the session a little more general. I have a few questions, but I think what's more important is having questions from the floor, and that will come in its own good time. So cutting to the chase, going straight to Manipur. But before that, a little preamble. I think there are such things as political ideals, okay? Not political ideologies, but values like law and order, abiding by the Constitution, protection of democratic institutions. And we have seen breakdown of this in Manipur, where in fact it's alleged that the apparatus of the state has also been used as machinery, you use the word weaponization, against its own citizens. So knowing all that we know about Manipur, I have two questions. One is a question of despondency. Does anyone in mainland India care? And the second one is one of hope. What would be the steps according to the Constitution, to the law, and to the roles of the various democratic institutions that would help to fix the situation?
Okay. The only disclaimer being I'm a lawyer. Lawyers don't know how to fix anything, almost. I represented a women's network in the Manipur petition before the Supreme Court called Women in Governance in India. They have members and volunteers in different parts or different states of the Northeast. And they gave us some information. Some of them were visiting camps, speaking to victims, and they said we need to intervene. So I did do that. And I think what one saw in the course of those proceedings, so if I may answer your question by looking at what happened in the legal proceedings before the court, because I think it reflects what you have asked. In the imagination of people engaging in the Supreme Court, whether it is lawyers, and I'm talking of lawyers who do not come from the states of Northeast or do not come from Manipur. And it was difficult to see that even lawyers who had always otherwise stood up and worked with us on human rights issues was split down the middle on grounds of ethnicity in the Manipur petition, which was a reminder to those of us who didn't know too much about the history of what had happened, that the breach is very severe. And it's not that those who have otherwise worked in the field of human rights, we stood on different sides of the aisle for the first time. And that was, to me, it was a very sobering moment to see that this is what this phase of strife has done. As so far as in the imagination of the rest of us, judges, lawyers, etc., we didn't know anything. I would only be asking my petitioners to keep helping me understand, explain. I remember even asking a young Kuki lawyer who I've known from before, and I didn't know he was Kuki till this violence broke out. And I would ask him, how do you pronounce these words? Because nobody there knew very much. In the judicial imagination, Manipur is simply a state in some remote part of India where we don't engage with very much. So it is left really to the state to place the cards on the table. There is an assumption, and rightly so, that when the state says something to the court, there will be a presumption that what the court is saying is correct, what the state is saying is correct. Because how does the system work otherwise? You have to have an assumption that if the state is saying normalcy is being restored, then that's a statement of fact. Particularly at a time when there is internet shutdown, nobody is getting information out. The case in Supreme Court did not start on 20th of July. It had actually started much earlier. And the state kept saying the various forces are taking charge, we are putting things back in control, and the court will of course believe the state if the state is making a statement, till things deteriorated to this point. And that is why I'm saying we are at a different juncture. The entire legal system, the edifice of the legal system, works on certain assumptions. Those assumptions are crumbling. I hope they haven't crumbled. I think they are crumbling. But they are making work of courts, work of restoring rights, safeguarding rights, difficult, because without those assumptions, as I said, one assumption is the state will give a true narrative of facts. The state will not conceal from or suppress information from the Supreme Court of India, the Chief Justice of India. But if the state's narrative and what is actually happening in Manipur are at variance, how does the legal system function? And if the legal system is not going to function, and if the court is not going to be able to intervene and step in and protect rights and protect lives, here we were talking about lives, how is this system going to work? So actually, this is not even a question for anybody who may have radical ideas about the nation state. I'm saying put all that aside. Can a nation state of the complexity of India work if the state is not going to, there are certain assumptions without which the system will not function. If the only narrative, when people come in with facts, only because that video went viral, that you knew that things were so ghastly and foul that even the court could no longer stay silent. But that is what was needed to shake mainland India, as you said. How much do they know? They were shaken because, actually, if it had just come in a paper, if Shillong Times had published that 3 women have been gang raped by a mob, I don't think any suo motu would also have been taken, with all due respect to the Supreme Court. That benumbed is our conscience and our comprehension. That was, and technology, of course, is a double-edged weapon, but when a video comes up, it doesn't stay within the territorial borders of India, we know that. So there had to be some intervention. But even when we were putting facts and figures, and we were only asking for the court to ask the state to intervene and do something to protect lives now, the narrative of the state was about infiltration, about drugs, militancy. And I remember saying to the court, why does the state not stop the infiltration? Stopping the infiltration is not our job. Civil society is not going to go and stand on the border with Myanmar and stop people. You need to stop infiltration. You have the army. You have various other forces, the number of forces we can't even remember. Please use them. Use them where they are needed. Stop the infiltration. Do what needs to be done. The state cannot use either national security as a pass for human rights abuses and to say, oh, just keep the constitution a little aside for now because, there's a little bit of a mayhem happening, or say mayhem will happen if the court interferes. And the court's actions, why does infiltration from Myanmar figure in a conversation, in a judicial proceeding, when the Chief Justice of India is talking about ensuring that women are not raped, people are not killed, relief camps are given what they need? Why does Myanmar infiltration come in? What is the state saying to all of us? This is not a strong state. This is a state that has abdicated every responsibility. Who is stopping the state from guarding the borders? Please do. But you can't say to me, what they're actually saying, the subtext, and the court knows how to read the subtext better than most of us, is keep your hands off this. Don't tell us what to do. We'll manage it. We'll handle it our own way. But fortunately, the court did not agree to that. And the court gave a very detailed order with multiple layers of oversight, accountability, not just leaving it to the state to decide who, what, when it will happen, but also asking for status reports. So I'm actually beginning to ask myself the question that what really does the state want to do? If you are a strong state, there are moments when force needs to be used against mobs that are lynching people, killing people. Yes, please do it. That doesn't happen. And the second thing, which may not be taken well, is the state an impartial state? I think it's time we need to ask ourselves the difficult questions, because we have a political theory here about how this country is to be organized and run. If the state is impartial, then where is the evidence of that? And if it is not impartial, how can this system work? Who is going to then be, can we have unity in this country? That's why I'm saying, forget any radical idea of citizenship and democracy. Let's get down to the very basics over here. How does a country of this kind stay united if the state is partisan, if the state is complicit? Those are questions that we need to ask ourselves. The rhetoric will not help. The rhetoric is, and that's true these days of everything, the more democracy gets hollowed out, the shriller the cry of India being mother of democracy, whatever. The shriller the cry of being a strong state. And I didn't think that I would be a person saying, well, can the state just perform its basic job?
Can I move on to a related question? One of the things that really has been perhaps the main tragedy in Manipur is the atrocities against women. And we can say lots more about that.
Of course.
Okay? And this has placed focus on women's rights, the larger picture. Okay? There's something that you said in an interview, that women's movements in India have eschewed supporting the implementation of a uniform civil code. So we're broadening the discussion here. in favor of using multiple strategies in their pursuit of gender equality. And in your speech, which was entitled From Uniformity to Equalities, okay, you said that the UCC is not the key to gender parity, but you talked about multiple strategies that women's groups or advocates for women's human rights could actually use, and one of them was alliances with minority communities. And you mentioned a few of that, including tribal groups. Okay? So in the broader picture now of women's rights, which has now been highlighted, or the lack of it has been highlighted in Manipur, how do we proceed along these lines?
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. I'll just say one more thing on the sexual violence thing, on the sexual violence that is undeniable today in Manipur. I think the state is now making instrumental use of sexual violence and violence against women. And I think as citizens, and definitely as feminists and political activists, we need to reflect on that carefully. The issue of sexual violence against women, at least in many parts of India, gained a lot of focus post the gang rape and murder of Nirbhaya in 2012. I feel that on reflection, we need to see where has that focus gone. And is that focus necessarily today helping women get more freedom and not safety? We don't need safety, we need freedom. And we want to be like all other citizens. As I often tell my younger friends, for me, what was the most fascinating part of doing LLM in NYU was that you could watch a movie alone and walk back at past midnight without looking over your shoulder. I would, of course, never do that, even at this age. Those of you who know, GNU has this tradition of having meetings in the mess at some very late hour. And by the time you're coming back, it's close to 1:32. And if I'm driving on my own, I actually even now keep my phone ready for an emergency call. And it's just a few kilometers from my house. But in New York, I could walk back. So it's not a genetic problem with the human species that we cannot have the freedom. We can imagine the freedom because it's available in other parts of the world. So if we are going to be a global power, maybe one of the things we'll have to figure out is that. However, the emphasis on that has today become an instrumental use by the state, where the state is using crimes against women, particularly sexual violence, to focus on who is violated. It's not the woman, it's her identity. It's about who, where, and by whom. And all the responses are centering around that. It has nothing to do with women. Women's bodies are once again being used for political ends. Because there was no running away from the Manipur incidents, and they realized that the Chief Justice was not going to be pushed away from the issue. So let's take these cases and put them to CBI and throw them, we'll punish them, etc., because we will pick up a few random people. And we hung some people for the 2012, in March 2020, we hung men. I think we need to reclaim certain issues. And we need to distinguish from what the state is doing. And for that, I feel a lot of us will also have to reflect, because even many those who are politically engaging with the issue see sexual violence in a certain way, rather than a feminist understanding of autonomy and agency of the woman who's seeking freedom, and the accountability of the state and not just of the mob and the men. On the Uniform Civil Code to the Egalitarian Civil Code, which actually is something that the women's movement said in the 90s, that we are not looking for uniform civil code, and uniformity per se as a value actually has I mean, what is the greatness of uniformity? So equality was a value that we thought would add. Having said that, in the 90s, actually the women's movement does not think like that anymore at all. We recently had a consultation in Delhi where we invited activists and women's rights groups from across the country. Few could join. And the thinking that we today have on this issue is that insofar as women's rights are concerned, over the decades, there has been advances made through civil laws. For instance, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, the Protection Against Sexual Harassment. These are civil laws which have emerged from the experiences of the women's movement, then engaging with the government to bring about a change in women's lives. One civil code that will, on issues of marriage, adoption, etc., change everything and be good for all women is actually a political project, and I think that's fairly clear. When it comes to issues of rights of indigenous populations, the issue is very, very complex because there are customary practices, there are customary rights, there are, and it is not as though women in those communities have not been pushing back on the inherent patriarchy within those also. It is not, at least I am not saying indigenous practices and customary rights are all the greatest.
So for example, matriliny cannot be a uniform civil code.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how much of matriliny really survives in real terms. I mean, it's more of a, it doesn't really come down to...
It's more romantic than...
Yeah, and in small groups. Also, for instance, the triple talaq issue. Who went to court? The Muslim women went to court. They fought their battle. They got triple talaq removed through their petitions in the Supreme Court. And we have a government that is beating the drum that we rescued Muslim women from triple talaq. It's a lie. Muslim women went to court and the Supreme Court said it is arbitrary and therefore it will have to go. So women have been actually finding their way forward. And I think that's the best way, because otherwise it is a political project. It is to whip particularly the Muslim minority community, whether it is on age of marriage or on polygamy, because there seems, of course, NFHS data tells us something very different. The NFHS data shows us that polygamy is quite rampant amongst Hindus also. But there seems to be this, how can a Muslim man have more than one wife and the Hindu man is feeling cheated that he's not getting the same. It really boils down to the Hindu man wants to have, why is the Muslim man having all the fun and I'm not having the fun? It has nothing to do with women. It just doesn't. Women will, and women do not see their rights as coming by trampling over rights of minorities or indigenous communities, etc., That, at least at this political juncture, is not the way forward. Do we want equal constitutional rights? Yes. But we want them in a way where at least speaking for myself, I'm not saying that the idea of equality in civil code should be abandoned at all. It should be retained. But there are many elements from for instance, I come from a Punjabi Hindu family. Okay, I don't know if this is going to be broadcast. My mother will be a little sad after hearing this. But that's okay. I've told her this in person many times. Women from Hindu families, educated, upper middle class, professional families, women do not get shares in inheritance. Women definitely do not get equal shares in inheritance because you have the legal instrument of the will, which is used repeatedly, and God forbid somebody dies without a will, everybody is asked to quickly give relinquishment deeds because, as they say in our families, then the love stays within the family. When the sister comes home, the brother will welcome. So the brother is not going to welcome if you're going to get your share, is what you're told quite clearly. You have to fight if you are going to get your share. And you have to fight real hard and create a mess in the family if you're going to ask for equal share. That is the truth of educated, upper class, upper middle class Hindu families. Somebody should do a study. Just do a data study, and this will be proven true. Under Muslim law, you cannot will away a certain share, so you'll get something. Because otherwise you're given some silly cupboard and bed as dowry, which only depreciates. I mean, what is a bed and a cupboard and a television going to do 20 years down the line? So there is something in many, many personal laws, so let's make a code like that. Let's debunk the Hindu undivided family. And for first and foremost, let's call out the political project. It's not about women. Whether it is on sexual violence and getting power for the state to give death sentence, which I oppose for all cases, including rape, or it is UCC, all we are doing is to give greater power to the state. And how can that be for the good of the citizen?
How shall we do this, Patricia? Should we ask for questions from the audience,
Yeah,
or shall we ask for written things, or
No,
you
I
have some questions? I'm
No,
sure.
I think the audience is, is okay with standing up and asking questions, or sitting down even.
We have a mic here.
We have a mic, it can be passed around. Please make the questions brief though. Sanjoy, I can see Sanjoy's hand. Please introduce yourselves, because this is also going live. So, sorry Vrinda, your mother must have heard it by now.
No, she's not in the country. I'm safe.
Hi. Well, channels have a strange way of reaching other countries also. Anyway, I'm Sanjay Hazarika. I'm a writer, and I recently shifted after 40 years in Delhi to Shillong, our home. The question is very simple. Recently in Parliament, a member of Parliament called Ranjan Gogoi made a statement saying that the entire basic structure of the Constitution is questionable. And he put forward a very long explanation. So I want, and a narrative has picked up saying that, certainly among the right wing, that this is something which is totally unacceptable and his views are correct, etc. That's one. And the second thing is just a reflection, is that soon after all these judgments by the Chief Justice, authored by the Chief Justice on various issues including Manipur, he's been taken out of the loop of selecting the Chief Election Commissioner because the government wants another cabinet minister to do it. So it's also disempowering the Supreme Court, Constitution, and the people.
Should I answer? Thanks, Sanjoy. Just before I speak, so that there is a full disclosure, I represented the Supreme Court staffer who made a complaint of sexual harassment against Justice Gogoi when he was the sitting Chief Justice of India. An inquiry, he actually sat on his own case on a Saturday morning. It's a very interesting matter. Its case says, in re, a matter of great public importance touching upon the independence of judiciary. That's the cause title. They made it up. Good. It really does touch upon the independence of the judiciary. I agree. After that, we saw what happened to that independence. On the issue of basic structure, actually the present Chief Justice of India, Justice Dr. Chandrachud, had a very good reply to Ranjan Gogoi's debut speech. This was the first time he spoke in Parliament. He was barely attending, I'm told. He said, it's just an opinion. He's not a judge anymore. It's just his opinion, nothing more, nothing less. And I think that's what it really is. Having said that, I think it points, as you rightly say, Sanjoy, to a very, very, and the other aspect that you linked it with, the new Election Commission Selection Committee. The assault is on the Constitution. This is it manifests itself in different ways. The present state wants to subvert, and I say this with full responsibility, under Bharatiya Nyaya Sahita, I am committing many offenses. It's not passed yet. Wants to denude the constitution, wants to also, as I said, not only change the terms of the equation. You can take any example today. Who is, the DGP is not here, I would really want to ask those who are, actually holding very important positions today. Who is adhering to rule of law? It is the state that is breaching, violating the rule of law over and over again. It is the citizens. It is the marginalized, oppressed communities which are adhering to the rule of law. We need the rule of law. The state does not need the rule of law. Why would a person in power want a rule of law? You will want rule by law. You will want rule by arbitrary power. The state will never want rule of law. These are myths we have created in our country. Take up any example and tell me who is adhering to rule of law. It is the people. The people will not survive, particularly if you are women, indigenous populations, Dalits, workers, everybody who is, not those who need to break tax laws, etc., and then get freebies at the end. That's the real revedi we are getting. It's more than a revedi, actually. We need the rule of law. We keep going to the court saying what? What are we asking from the court these days? Please see the orders. It actually feels, for somebody who's now been in the profession for 30 plus years, when we started, we were demanding changes and of expanding the canvas of citizens' rights. Today we are saying, can you please tell the state to follow the law? Can you please tell the state to not shut the internet without following the procedure written down in the Indian Telegraph Act? We are only going to the court to tell the court, please tell the state to do what it is constitutionally bound to do. The selection committee of the Election Commission is one more blow to constitutional democracy. We are going to be reduced to people who will sit in our house and cast votes on our mobile phone with an OTP, connecting our Aadhaar. That is what citizenship is going to become in this country, and we will hail it as the most efficient election ever in the world. That is where we are headed. I'm, of course, making out a more bizarre scene, but I don't think it's unimaginable. Justice Joseph had passed the judgment on Election Commission, Justice K.M. Joseph, in the Supreme Court. At his farewell, the reticence shown by the senior-most law officers of the government was noted by the media. Never had we seen this kind of open pushback, blatant. A judge is retiring. No words of praise. Otherwise, there are long passages read out. Because you didn't like a judgment he passed, his judgment, you have not challenged because it can't be challenged. The judgment is correct in law. It's not about removing this particular Chief Justice after Manipur. This bill on Election Commission would have been brought in, regardless of Manipur or not, because that is how you will reduce us to an election voting machine. We are all simply button pushers, and technology is enabling everything, but just disabling citizenship. That is what I'm saying, who's adhering to rule of law? So the Supreme Court passes a judgment. The Supreme Court passed a judgment on Delhi government and its powers as to what will be in its domain and what will be in the kitty of the center. What did the government do? It brought in a law which is counter to the judgment. There is a judgment on election commission composition because it was seen that the election commission was not truly independent. And that really goes to the heart of electoral democracy. So what did the government do? It's brought in a law where it changes. What do you do with brute majority? You can pass anything. Somebody had very funnily written that actually you can now pass bills faster than you can make Maggi noodles. And it's true, it happened on the last day of Parliament. So you have a brute majority in Parliament. You are overturning and subverting judgments of the Supreme Court because the assault is on democracy. And yet, the rhetoric of mother of democracy becomes louder and shriller, deafening all of us and drowning us. So this is a very, very serious assault that we are witnessing, and it will not stop. And, we as citizens will have to decide what is going to happen. And it's not going to stop with X citizen or Y citizen or A group or B group.
So there are many hands.
Benjamin.
Yeah. Benjamin, please. Then followed by Malcolm and then Bill Marvanya. Why are there no ladies asking questions?
Bill Marvanya, the last.
Good evening. My name is Benjamin Lingdorf from Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. My question is related to the general elections which will happen early next year. If you look at what is happening in our country today, we see an increasing rate of polarization. We see politics of the majority, whereby the other minorities are all kept aside, because when you count the numbers, they will not matter when it comes to who will rule and who will form the next government. We see that in Manipur. We are seeing that in Haryana. In fact, if you go back to 2014, just before the elections, there was the cases in Muzaffarnagar, I think, Muzaffarnagar.
September 2013.
Yeah, so those things were there. In 2019 also we saw similar cases. Now also we see a similar trend. And if we look at 14 and 19 and now, in 2023, we are so close to elections, one can safely say, at least I can safely say, that this trend of polarization is only going to increase. Today it is Manipur and Haryana, tomorrow it may be some other state, tomorrow it may be Meghalaya also, right? Because we have these issues across the country. So, ma'am, what is your take on this? As far as religious polarization for electoral gains is concerned, and this politics of the majority leaving aside all the minorities. Thank you.
I'm sure you know the answer actually better than me and will articulate it also better than me. But actually if you see when Rajiv Gandhi government came to power, this is not, and they won, they swept parliamentary elections. This is not new in this country. It's a contestation of ideas that has for long. I would say it was at the birth of the Indian nation state with the partition taking place. So the violence and the breach between religious communities or any other communities always pays political dividends through India's history and will pay political dividends. Therefore, the burden is on the majority community. Until and unless, and I often say this, also, so again, now the Bharatiya Nyaya Sahita that I was reading last evening. So if I were to say that, something about a majority community, actually they can put me in. So although you said you can safely say, I'm not sure how safely you can say this, but you can say it nonetheless. And we must say it, and they must do what they have to do. That's their business. That's what power does to people usually. It will have this contestation of idea about the nature of Indian nation state has been at the heart of this country's 75 years. It's played itself out very badly. And there are many factors, some of which are external to us. including the neighborhood, the violence, the cross-border violence, which are all real things. I'm not a Gaga land person at all. I feel we need to engage with reality also. But we have never, as a people, engaged with these aspects of conflict and difference. And now, that very idea, and we know what Golwalkar and all wrote in 1925, it didn't happen in 2014. The idea was sown in 1925. So if we will go the majoritarian way, and the numbers game of elections makes that possible, and that's why elections, not democracy throws up its own set of challenges, but is elections and first past the post, is that even the best option? Or do we need to engage with this issue very differently, is something we need to think about. Let me give you a sample from what was happening in the Article 370 matter, which was now taken up is presently ongoing in the Supreme Court. A senior lawyer called Mr. Zafar Shah from Srinagar, very erudite, very good lawyer, who knows, obviously he's lived his whole life in Kashmir. It's like all of you would be able to talk about Meghalaya. If I have to talk about Manipur, I have to call up people, I have to ask somebody how to pronounce, I have to do a lot of reading. You don't need to do all that. Similarly, Zafar Shah was arguing without any paper, because he knows the history, he knows how, what were the terms of accession, etc. And the issue came to the issue of referendum, that is part of the historical process. And the court very categorically said things like referendum are out of question. It's very much an integral part. We are only looking at certain things. So somewhere in our imagination, we have actually made I'm not saying it is an integral part or not. I'm not going to venture into that. It's not my expertise. I don't want to discuss that here. But somewhere in our historical imagination, we have not engaged with difference and history in a way where we can have different kinds of asymmetrical political relations. Like it's said by many theorists, many of you are political theorists, that India has an asymmetrical federalism. So how does this asymmetrical federalism then work? And how does it work at a time when there is a majoritarianism? And a majoritarianism that premises itself in religion. We have not, as peoples, actually engaged with that. And there, I think we are also at fault. We've not, in the human rights work, we've largely looked at the state. But as peoples, we've not engaged with how would we live together simply because we are in a territorial boundary, and yet have rights and freedoms and respect. That, I think, has missed our discourse to a large extent. It may be there in academic discourse, but it was never there in our popular discourse. Saying unity in diversity and slogans like that is neither here nor there. We just treat people like costumes and dances, and that doesn't take us anywhere. And there are historical injustices which we don't engage with, which we like to feel, which we feel that with passage of time they're over and done with. But actually they don't go away, they just simmer. I think we are in, it's very interesting how more and more of us are reading Hannah Arendt and are actually finding answers there. And it will look very different. It is very different. We are in the 21st century. Of course, the shape and size and form will be very different. But I think for the next future generations, this is a moment of crisis. And that's why I'm saying we need to somewhere come together and think differently. Having said which, where is the hope? Because I hate being despair. I will not despair. In Haryana, you mentioned, I had a few clients in Mewat area, and so I was asking them what is happening. So they said the Jats have actually come out and said, we will not allow this communal violence to happen. And it was very hard to believe that Jat Hindus are saying we will stand by Muslims. I mean, those two groups have lunged at each other for a long, long time, including in the Muzaffarnagar September 2013 violence. The Khap Panchayats came out and said, no, you will not be allowed to abet this communal strife over here. Farmers groups from Punjab came out in large numbers. There's one particular group called the Ugrahan group. They wear the yellow turbans and the yellow dupattas. They have a large women's contingent. They came out in large numbers and said, we want to extend our support to the Muslim community in Nu, Mewat, in Haryana, and say, we are going to stand by you. And this is a very new equation that is being formed. Haryana is going to go in for elections. So, as you very rightly said, the outbreak of violence was not surprising. Of course, the toll is tragic. But the farmers' groups are saying, enough of this. We are not going to allow you to do this. So until and unless these new alliances start getting made, the numbers game can't be changed. That's a numerical, statistical game. We can't do anything about that. But there is hope in these new equations and alliances. So the hope is on the ground. It's not coming from us, and it's not coming from the top for sure.
Malcolm?
Oops. No. This jug has.
Good evening. My name is Malcolm Roy. I'm a retired Central Public Sector employee. I just had a small question regarding that basic structure of the Constitution. But anyway, before I come to that, if I may be allowed, I just want to make a quick observation. Going back to your opening remarks, when you talk about ignorance, about our part of the world. And here I just want to say that, in my years of service, I've always found, particularly from, our friends from the mainland, and more so with due respect from people from the north of the country, they have these very glib remarks they make about us joining the national mainstream. That national mainstream joining is always been shoved down our throats for so many years, which is a statement which smacks of so much condescension, is so condescending, it is so supercilious and so insulting. And I think that is part of the reason why we have this lack of appreciation by the rest of the country for people from this part of the world, and vice versa. Because there's always that feeling of difference, because we're always being told to become part of the national mainstream for whatever it means. I still remember many years ago, I heard a radio discussion, and a journalist was saying, journalist from here, you may not agree with what he said, but this throws it into perspective. He says, what is this national mainstream you're talking about? Because somebody was telling him about joining the national mainstream. He said, is it dowry deaths?
Yeah.
Is it bride burning? Is it female infanticide? Then I don't want to be part of that national mainstream. I mean, that puts it into perspective. I just wanted to say this. And another thing is, again, from my years of service, I've always found that if we treat the Northeast as a punishment posting for government officials, this problem will always persist. This lack of appreciation, this ignorance, and this condescension will always continue. So if we say that, when you go to the Northeast, it's because of a punishment, what are we? Living in a zoo. So this is just a quick observation I wanted to make on that. But coming back to the question about the Constitution, taking off from what was said earlier about what Chief Justice had remarked about the comments of Justice Gogoi, Chief Justice had called the basic structure of the Constitution as the North Star. I think that was the word he used.
Lodestar, North Star, correct.
Is the North Star which is supposed to guide
Guide.
the interpreters and the implementers of the Constitution. But what I find a bit disturbing, and I wanted to understand from you about how do we go forward, is what I found disturbing was that the Vice President of the country, who's also the chairman of the upper house of parliament, said in his remarks to the presiding officers at a meeting in Jaipur in the month of January, I think I read it in the newspaper a few days ago, he said that he thought that the Supreme Court ruling on the basic structure of the Constitution, which was passed in 1973 and which we still follow today, he says he finds that judgment to be in error. Basically, he said that it was not correct. It was a bad precedent, I think the words he used was, it set a bad precedent. And he says he doesn't agree with it. Now, if this is coming from the presiding officer of the upper house of parliament, coupled with, as you said, the brute majority of the ruling dispensation, then how do we address this problem? I mean, then they can turn the Constitution on its head tomorrow and say democracy will no longer be, the guiding light of the Constitution. Secularism will no longer be relevant. So what do we do? I mean, then we come to a very difficult position insofar as the respect for the basic precepts of the Constitution is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, for first of all pointing out. I want to actually add a little bit to that ignorance remark. I can get away in life and do very well being ignorant about your lives. You won't be able to move on if you don't learn about our lives. That's the power. That's the power we have. I am ignorant because it actually doesn't make any difference to my life. It's a fact. I need to acknowledge that. And yes, please don't join that national mainstream. And this again is not a creation of this regime. That everyone should join the national mainstream is what we have heard for 75 years in this country. And that's why I'm saying the conversation about difference and living and with plurality and respect has never taken place in this country. Because we are either told, oh, no, this is national security matters. These are border states. So there is some other life that will happen here. You're right about punishment posting. Justice Akhil Qureshi, one of our best judges from Gujarat, passed orders against the present dispensation when they were not sitting in Delhi but were sitting in Ahmedabad or Gandhinagar. He was sent to Tripura from Bombay. Yes, it is seen as a punishment posting. And you're right, it's not just about a zoo. I think it's worse. It's about those lives don't matter. That is the disrespect that is shown. And it is a disrespect that should be called out. For each one of us should be called out on it. So thank you for saying that.
Bill?
I just want to answer his question on basic structure. That is what I'm saying, the assault is on the Constitution. So I actually was hearing a talk where the Dr. L.M. Singhvi memorial lecture was being held. Chief Justice Dr. Chandrachud was the keynote speaker, and after him, the Vice President, Mr. Dhankar, who himself is a lawyer, spoke. The Chief Justice's talk was very interesting. His talk was on universal adult suffrage and how India was one of the few countries that gave itself universal adult suffrage right at the time of independence, unlike many Western countries where women were not given, etc., etc. So it was like, look, our Constituent Assembly and four fathers, four mothers had the wisdom to do this. After which, the Vice President made a scathing attack on what? That Parliament is supreme. not the judiciary. And that was his takeoff point from universal adult suffrage. So the court is still believing, and the court has to function within its role, its prescribed role, and will function with constitutional morality and laws. But that was a scathing attack that if you have agreed that universal adult suffrage was great, then that means Parliament is supreme, not the judiciary, not the court. Then the attack on basic structure, and I think by now we know how this regime works. There's a way in which the crescendo rises. There'll be ideas which will be thrown. Suddenly, all the TV channels start discussing something. And there are certain Twitter handles, I don't want to give them publicity, so I'm not going to name them, which we all know, which actually I look at in the morning because you know what the next week's agenda will be. So to that extent, they're helpful. So the fact that basic structure is not inviolable is an idea that has been thrown in the public domain, and the present Rajya Sabha MP, using his earlier position as Chief Justice of India, and therefore we must believe that he knows the Constitution very well, although his own judgments actually upheld the basic structure, he's had a change of mind. He should explain to us why he's had a change of mind, because we don't understand then how those judgments were passed and authored by him. There is going to be an attack on the basic structure. This is how it begins. Very soon everybody will be talking about it, and there will be opinion pieces, and we'll be told that the Constituent Assembly, and I wouldn't be surprised if we are told, but Baba Saheb Ambedkar never said there's a basic structure, because it's always rides on the, like Gandhi, everything is done in the name of Gandhi. We'll be told, where did Baba Saheb Ambedkar say there should be a basic structure? And if he didn't say it, well, he said many other things which we are not listening. There will be an attack, because basic structure is a constitutional hurdle. And it's a constitutional hurdle they are not being able to surmount. Many petitions have tried it, where democracy and secularism, etc., are not something that you can tinker with. Of course, you can reduce democracy to votes. So there will be a challenge mounted. Like, for instance, a challenge that is ongoing in our midst. And again, just for fair disclosure, I represent the Jamiyat Hind in that matter. We have a Places of Worship Act, which made an exception of Ayodhya, and said, okay, after, in 1991, that never will we alter any other basic structure. We are frozen in time in 1950. The Supreme Court has just allowed the Gyanvapi mosques. I mean, is this archaeological curiosity? Are we as a nation so dumb that there's an archaeological curiosity what is under that mosque, and it will then stop at that, when the archaeologists will then hold a conference, and then that matter will be put an end, and we'll all go home having found out what was under it? Wasn't this the path? Isn't this the pathway being chosen? Where is the Places of Worship Act? It is being demolished on a daily basis in this country. And in this, in fact, the Supreme Court has permitted the ASI to find out. Why? With the passage of history, that is the way history works. There is a book by Dr. Upinder Singh that under Hindu temples were Buddhist temples. It's the overlaying of time and history and period. So the Supreme Court itself is also opening the door, I'm afraid, to some of these things.
Babil, and I can see Professor Dubey and Professor Lakhon Kumar and Avner. And I think we'll end with that. Sorry, there is one lady there who's put up her hand. The only lady, yes.
Patricia, thank you. My name is Bill Marbania. I am a retired government servant.
Retired DGP, yeah?
That's what you said. And ma'am, I first would like to say that yours is a loud, shrill, and encouraging voice in the wilderness. I only hope it gets louder. My question is that, as a retired person, there are lots of men and women, we are experienced, educated, we know where a face begins and a nose stops. But there are a lot of government, directives that retired people cannot say this and cannot say that. Now, I find that very sort of violative of our rights. I mean, we know that, we'll not sort of misuse or the official secret act and whatever is written in there. But why this sort of large minority of educated men and women with a lot of experience, why are we being muzzled by these government directives? I mean, apart from the only thing I read, because a lot of junk flies around the government issues. And the only thing I look at is when my DA will increase next. So the other ones I'm not too bothered, but it is, it concerns us. We'd like to share our experiences, we'd like to talk about things, but we are being muzzled by some of these directives by the government. I wish something could be done about it. Thank you.
There's a very interesting group that has come together called the CCG. I can't remember what one C stands for. It's the Constitutional Conduct Group, which comprises of former judges and many civil servants, both bureaucrats, Home Secretary, etc. So, from top notch to many other bureaucrats, including many former police officers, including former DGPs. And this group is like, as people who have served the country, agree with and understand the working of the country, have been actually bringing out communications addressed to the government on important issues, even reports. The state may or may not take notice of it or may not act upon it. That's up to the state. But this group is making its voice and presence felt. And I'd be happy to share their contact details, because they are all, you can only, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you have to be a former either judge or public servant to be a member of this group. And they speak on issues that matter. We also know that many people write books, even people who've been, like Mr. Dullat has written a book. I don't know whether it's good, bad, I don't know. But I'm saying people do write books. So I don't know if it's a forever muzzle or there is a cooling off period and then you can speak. But one does see many former public servants actually, in fact, I appear in the Bilkis Bano remission matter, and my petitioner is a former DGP, Miran Borwankar, who retired from Maharashtra, and a former Indian Foreign Service ambassador, Madhu Bhaduri, and the founder of Association of Democratic Reform, Mr. Professor Jagdeep Chokar. I filed the petition on their behalf. So not only are people speaking, but they're actually going to court and saying we've served the country and we think this is wrong. This is not how what these rules were meant for. This is not how remission law is to be interpreted. So I think there is a moment when they are stepping forward. Oh, okay.
Professor Dubey, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Indrajit Dubey.
Please also tell us where you come from.
Well, I'm a Vice Chancellor of National Law University, Meghalaya. I basically want to take it into a little different angle. And I do aware about your opinion expressed on UCC in different platform and other places. I always question that what is the civil in the Uniform Civil Code? Right. And then you have reflected upon on some of the issues. And possibly all the law scholar or who are the student of the law, we always look the codification as a standardization process, right? Or a pattern to be created. Now, what is your opinion in a pluralistic society? Because codification was experimented more in a non-pluralistic society. And then we have experimented here first, Britishers bringing the IPC. And then they tried to, test the Benthamite concept that codification is good into this kind of a pluralistic society or not. We are independent. We have constitutions. We have a many pluralistic society, as you have rightly pointed out. In fact, I was also totally unaware about the 6th scheduled state before I joined in this National Law University. And then now I found that many of the principles, which though there is a governance fragmentation, I think there is an article which has been wrote by Madam Patricia Mukhim few days back about the governance structure into this. That means in a 6th scheduled society, there is a lot many pluralism within this particular society itself. And then how we can think about standardizing that particular process, or should we at all do? Or the next question is, while we are doing that, should we not look into that what are the good practices are already there, which are time tested, going well, doing well, and to boost those particular principles. I've been told by one of the very senior professor in criminal law, he did a research in his life and he found that some of the provisions in the criminal procedure code in Meghalaya was better than the CRPC. So I know your opinion, you have also touched upon this. So I wanted to know what is this civil within this particular civil code in the context of a standardization, not the political angle, but in context of this standardization. Thank you so much.
I actually find politics in everything, so I'm sorry about that, but I don't think law can be disjuncted from politics at all. Law is a political exercise. Let me just answer your question a little bit differently from what Dr. Glenn had also asked. Before the Uniform Civil Code issue was thrown in the public domain, it's there in the manifesto of the BJP for many years. It's no surprise. And it's there in the directive principles, but there are many other directive principles that we don't even glance at anymore. There was the marriage equality petition that was heard by the Supreme Court. I was representing a group of lesbian and trans persons and bisexual, trans and lesbian persons before the Supreme Court seeking marriage equality and relational equality. The Solicitor General appearing for the Union of India gave fairly voluminous written submissions, very strongly opposing marriage to be accorded to persons of different sexual orientation and gender identity. They said they can live. They can live whichever way they want. We won't say anything to them, but not marriage. And one very long table was given of statutes saying that if you will give them marriage equality, all these laws will get impacted because marriage features in multiple statutes, which is true. And therefore, we can't go down this route. It was therefore very amusing that the very same government, after 3-4 weeks, wanted a uniform civil code in which will have to include marriage for everybody. And We were told they need it throughout the territory of India for everyone. Whereas we had just been told it can't be done for everyone because it will open up Pandora's box and will lead to some kind of legal complexity that nobody will be able to navigate. The second part of why, and this is, I'm still just addressing the concerns that Dr. Glenn had asked. Two more points. One is related to land, which, as you mentioned, the 6th schedule, and we have the 5th schedule in various parts of central India, where there is grazing land, common land, it's put to common use, it's not single ownership title. Again, people in mainland India have no conceptualization of that. We don't share anything with anyone. So we are very happy with digitization of land records. And what will happen in 5th and 6th schedule area, we're not thinking. How do we understand those aspects if we are going to be looking at resources? How will we understand at a time, for instance, one of the whole, I know you said it's not about politics, but I'm afraid I do not know how to discuss this. The civil code is to be made uniform for women. That is the only thing we are being told. It is in the interest of women. That's why we are responding as women. That everybody will get maintenance from the husband, will get divorce when they want it. My office does a lot of cases of maintenance under domestic violence law, section 125. Even when the children are about to be thrown out of school, the interim maintenance order doesn't come because you can keep going up the hierarchy of courts, as you know very well. Execution is, we file contempt, we file for execution, they file for stay. It's a game that goes on. What is needed for women, children, others who may not be able to get, and there is massive unemployment post-COVID. We know that. It doesn't matter what data is produced. Do we talk about social security when we are going to talk about uniform civil code? That is the civil in the civil code. We should be talking about social security provided by the state. We should be talking about marriage and relational equality across genders and sexual orientation in a civil code. That is the civility. But the state is not interested in that part of the story. You're absolutely right. The rest is about codification and standardization, and that's a process of time. Roshni knows this. We know how the Christian women fought, engaged with the clergy, the Joint Women's Program led by Jyotsna Chatterjee in Delhi campaigned for divorce rights by engaging with the clergy, by engaging with the church, by engaging with the government, and for years they worked till they got the Divorce Act. These are processes, and through these processes women have moved forward. But if the state wants a process, then you're right. What is civil about it? Let's talk social security, because women are reaching destitution today. And it's very easy to blame the individual. And the court, you are aware of all the judgments. The courts have even gone to the extent of saying to the man, even if you don't have a job, I don't care, go and beg, but you provide for the wife. What does that judgment order even mean? Why should the state not step in if if the man doesn't have money? Not those men who put in a classified ad by their parents that I've just now disowned my son from everything. Please read the classified. Maybe it doesn't happen in Meghalaya because you're not in the national mainstream. Look at the classified ads in Delhi newspapers. The minute the daughter-in-law steps out of the house, the son is disowned and an ad is put out. Those are things that we need to, you're right, that is where we need to put our focus.
Avna.
I actually wanted to provoke a response between you and the DGP, because earlier this year, the DGP had issued kind of a press statement, I think it was carried in the Shillong Times, about having preventive detention for repeat drug peddlers, because his logic was that, most of the people who are peddling drugs are always repeat offenders. So I actually wanted to see that, back and forth, but unfortunately he's no longer here. So how does one go forward? Because his reasoning seems very sound, because he's on the field, he encounters these people all the time. And so how would a response be levied against that, Because I think it's also a very dangerous trend that is being uttered by the senior most official in the state. So how does one go ahead with that? And I wish he was here, actually.
The new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita says you can do trial in absentia. It actually says so. So we will just have to talk with the DGP in absentia. It's the first time we are introducing trial in absentia in the country. So, see, we'll have to look at two things here. Nobody's saying that drugs are not a problem. Under the law, the NDPS law, etc., it's also upon what is the quantum. That is a big game changer in terms of law. Are you selling or are you a consumer? And therefore, obviously, the penalties are described very differently, and rightly so. But what is preventive detention, and where does the power of preventive detention come from? And preventive detention is, through the colonial route, been one of the most draconian powers that the state has. And every state, regardless of regime, wants that power to be there. And of course, the agents of the state are happy to use it. And we find it missing. I think places when what had happened in early May in Manipur actually warranted preventive detention to be immediately invoked and people taken into custody to stop the mobs from the rampage, which we didn't see the use of power. So while the law is one thing, the use of the law cannot be de-linked from the political apparatus that operates it. I also think what has happened with our crimes and this new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, as it is called. I'm sorry to use Hindi words here, but that's what they have called it. We can just call it BNS for now. It's like a somebody has taken the sections and said, this relates to women and children. Let's put them all in one chapter. So it's more like a rearrangement exercise, not actually getting rid of colonial hangovers, etc. And preventive detention has been expanded. And where I think the penal code in its imagination is wrong, we don't make a difference between vice, crime, and offenses which would be of a more graver and serious nature. And I would put offenses by the state at a very high punitive mark, because the state has power, and therefore if the state commits offenses, it must entail even greater consequences. And we have made criminal law the instrument of social control, because we don't have an imagination, and that's why I have a very serious concern about the very casual use of the phrase law and order, which all of us have started using very casually. The penal offenses cannot become ways of social control, but they are. We have no other way of social engagement. There is no form in which the state is today engaging with the citizen or even talking with the citizen except through punitive consequences. It is the only language. And preventive detention then becomes like, what else am I supposed to do with these guys? We've forgotten that this is not, the state is not supposed to be wielding the stick. that shift has taken place. And that shift has been encouraged. It was always there, but now it's not even a stick. It's the state is using way more than a stick against its people. So how do you create against things like, somebody who is an addict, somebody who is perhaps peddling small quantities? Yes, it's wrong to sell drugs. I don't know the circumstances. I'm not justifying a crime, but I'm saying the state cannot be, that is not the only role of the state. And we as citizens have also become a little complacent about, he committed a crime, he built his jhuggi on the road, then what is the state going to do? But of course demolish it, and it's very much within the law. But the law is therefore not the criteria on which things are to be measured all the time. So I think that conversation needs to be made with the DGP in absentia.
Lady there. Then Professor Kaman, I think we'll end this discussion. Otherwise,
No dinner.
people who have early dinner will not be very happy.
Good evening, ma'am. Yeah, I'm Payal Bajaj here. I come from a women's NGO, ma'am. So my just small concern was that, what are your thoughts on why is there so much of delay in justice, ma'am? Maybe there are many women, the justice comes out after 10 to 12 years, maybe for a rape case or maybe so. And at the end of 10 to 12 years, maybe she is dead or must have committed suicide. So I just wanted to know, ma'am, your thoughts on the delay of justice. Why does it take so much of time?
See, some answers are administrative, so I'm not going to. We have the ratio of courts to sit population is very low. We don't have systems in place. So some are administrative questions, and so what you should do as your NGO when the budget comes out, look at the budget given to the judiciary, particularly to the lower judiciary, not for high tech in the Supreme Court. That should be given. I am all for it, but that doesn't affect most people. Look at the budget given to the lower judiciary, the allocation. Look at the budget given to defense. I have nothing against every state arming itself to the teeth and wanting to threaten each other. That's not my business. But the safety and security of half the population is not dependent on the border. It's dependent on here. What are you doing? What is the budget allocation we are making? And the state is so concerned about women that every sentence, every speech has women littered around it, and particularly women's safety. In fact, all the time we are hearing that the state is very deeply concerned about us, but we don't see it in the money. So they should make those allocations. Secondly, these delays are not accidental. The delay will also happen, some delays. So the Nirbhaya matter was fast-tracked, and we hung people because the next day after that March 2020, no rapes have since happened. Now we are all fine in this country. We were told it will be okay once we have hung these 4 men. But why did Nirbhaya become an exception, the case? Why didn't it become a benchmark? There was a reference made earlier to Muzaffarnagar, September 2013, where the Muslims suffered targeted attack, and they had to, it was the first time to my knowledge, I can be wrong, where there was internal displacement in the rural areas, and those people have never returned. They were given land elsewhere. So we are actually creating in rural India, completing the ghettos based on religion in the north I'm talking about. 7 women came to me with their cases. I moved the Supreme Court. We got a very good judgment in March 2014. It goes by the name of Muhammad Haroon and others. It was many people had filed cases around riots. mine was 7 women who were gang raped. We got detailed directions from the Supreme Court, very good directions. And the trial was to happen in a fast-track court in Muzaffarnagar. I used to make the journey from Delhi to Muzaffarnagar every time the case was to be heard. I remember we had, of course, in between we had to file a contempt, etc., to get the case. That's a very long story, I won't go there. I remember one day standing with one of the women and telling the judge, please record her evidence today. Any further delay and she is under huge pressure. There was intimidation, there was threats, there was money, etc. She may not be able to withstand, please record. No, the accused are seeking time, blah, blah. We were given an adjournment. We went back again next time. Again the request was made. Again the court was not inclined to record evidence. It's contrary to the Criminal Procedure Code. It says you must record evidence. The new Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013 was already in place. Section 309 of the Code of Criminal Procedure says trial must be concluded within 2 months of the charge sheet being filed. I placed an affidavit. It's part of the judicial record. I placed an affidavit on record saying she is under huge pressure. Please record her statement now. She will not be able to withstand this pressure. The court gave an adjournment. The woman never came back to court to depose. She turned hostile. Only one woman survived the passage of time. And in March 2023 or April 2023, I forget the dates, the month, but a few months ago, we got a conviction for the first time in the only case of Muzaffarnagar gang rape. All the others stepped back. For this woman to give her evidence, we had to relocate her in Delhi because of the pressures. This was a fast-track court with a special public prosecutor. These are not accidental, incidental things happening. And even for this judgment, I had to move, in March I moved the Supreme Court, in April or May they gave the judgment. I went back to the Supreme Court saying, it's been 10 years. Can you please ask them to conclude the case? What do you hear on television? Fast-track courts. Day-to-day trial. None of this is happening. It's a lie. It's a complete lie. When they don't want certain cases to happen, it won't. There are many incidents of Northeast, which you know better than me, where there have been very serious accusations of sexual violence. Nothing will happen. So there is that's why even as women's rights people, please see through what the state will allow and so now today we have a judgment which says that there was targeted sexual violence against a Muslim woman during the communal conflict of Muzaffarnagar. It is a record they cannot erase. What they will do with them later, the Bilkis Bano case tells us another story. Thirdly, there's one other thing I wanted to just add to this. When we work as women's rights NGOs, I have a thought. We focus only on saying, when a woman goes, the policeman should be sensitive, he should lodge the FIR, he should do this, he should do that, give her a police officer. My experience with women police officers is not great. I just want a professional, impartial, good police. That's all. But you don't look at the rest of the system. Let me go back to the Nirbhaya case. There was a carpenter who had climbed the same bus, who was robbed of his daily wages. His wallet was taken away, and he was thrown out of that very bus. He went to a PCR, which was standing in Delhi, and he told the PCR what had happened. You think a PCR in Delhi responds to a carpenter losing his daily wage? They brushed him away. What if they had taken his complaint and immediately tracked that bus down? These crimes are preventable crimes. But as women's rights people, please look at other marginalizations. That cop is not going to transform into one professional, efficient, impartial cop because a woman has walked in when he has just thrown one Muslim man away or a worker away or a Dalit man away. It will not change. We cannot have a narrow perspective. It will have to be an across-the-board perspective. And that is something women's rights NGOs will have to think about. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patricia. Well, I'm Professor Lakhon Kumar, Professor of Biochemistry in Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. Well, Vrindaji, I think before I ask my question to you, I think I'll narrate 3 instances. Rather, 2, I would say. 1, because Manipur has already been touched. So let's go sequentially. First incident, when the new Parliament House was going to be inaugurated, or rather inaugurated, I would say, the Honorable PM invited the highly intellectual group of people who seems to be much more intellectual than the Nobel laureates, the sadhus and the sons of this country. And they were invited there to do whatever yagya, whatever, to purify it and as a good omen. That is one present display of what the PM professes and what it is displayed all the time. The second incident, rather the third, I would say, because second I'll put the Manipur, which has been discussed already. The third is the most recent one, maybe day before yesterday, where we saw that when a member of the parliament started speaking, suddenly we don't see his face. And for some time, indeed, I was surprised that how come the honorable speaker is taking out these voices which doesn't sound like his by simply moving his neck. It took me some time to realize that actually somebody else is speaking, but his face is not being shown. Now, this is again another brazen display of power and how you control the things. Now, having said that, I have this question to you, madam. Well, looking at these instances, and there are many more, but the most recent one are these that are very fresh in our memories. How do you think, say a few years down the line, the basic tenets of the Constitution, which of course you have touched upon a little earlier, one is of course the fundamental rights, and the other is of course secularism. And beginning, let's say, maybe it has started, but probably it will really go a little more. I think push will begin maybe May 24, depending upon the result. I think, what do you see? Do you see, because, you know, why I'm mentioning this, because this happened at the temple of democracy, which is our parliament. And this is where, although, you know, these days, of course, the sanctity of parliament has really been degraded, because we see that it is more like a theater, that when the main actor comes and delivers his dialogue, I think people behind, you know, tap the table and clap and sloganeering and so on and so forth. But that has become more of a theater, but we will still say that it is a temple of democracy, and I think by and large we'll accept that it is still, to a greater extent, a temple of our democracy. Now, when these things are brazenly being violated in the parliament itself, let's leave aside the common citizen in nooks and corners, leave aside Northeast. How do you see these two basic tenets of the Constitution? Will it really stay a few years down the line? Like I mentioned, the fundamental rights, particularly these one, and of course the secularism. You as an activist, as an eminent lawyer, how do you see things panning out few years down the line, maybe starting May 2024? Thank you.
I hate looking into the future. I really don't, I don't predict anything. I just feel we need to do what we need to do. But it's not something that's going to happen in May 2024. As I've said before, I think the basic structure is under serious assault, and I think our rights and secularism is endangered today, and we will have to retrieve it. Those in power want it to be subverted. The opposition will do when it wants to do, if it helps in elections. If it doesn't help in election, they won't do. The courts are not going to save us or the country. It's not their job, and they are not taking that on in any case. I also think, for me, a protest by citizens asserting their rights is the temple of democracy, not people getting elected in I don't know whichever way. One Brij Bhushan Singh gets elected. I don't know what to call those places. So elections are a game. It's a game we play, but that's not how we want to live in this country. It's a game we play every 5 years. It's not a festival, it's a game. And the game has diabolical rules. If we have to save the basic tenets, we will have to do it. And actually, we don't have an if. It's the only way we'll be able to live. So we don't have a choice in the matter. That's why I'm saying I don't look into the future, because what are our options? What are our choices? It's the only way we will live as citizens. We cannot go back to being subjects. So we will have to do what we will have to do, and let there be many, many democracies, theaters of democracy across this country. And we know people fight, and we know people are paying a price. They protested on what they think is an unjust law, and young people, young leaders are sitting in jail for it. But they fought, and the rest of us will keep fighting.
I can see that as the evening goes on, Vrinda is getting much more fiery. And she can go on for another hour, but we need to also think of our stomachs. Thank you very much, audience. You've been a very, very reflective, responsive, attentive audience. We couldn't have asked for a better audience for this kind of a discourse. Thank you very much for the questions. And those of you who still have questions, Jerry, you can engage with Vrinda in the dining hall.
Something. Actually, people here are perhaps better equipped and more articulate to answer each of those than I was. Just saying.
No, they can engage with you there, so long as they don't prevent you from having your dinner. Thank you once again for responding to our call and for being here today on this very, very auspicious day for the Shillong Times. We are really grateful. Thank you, Dr. Mukul, for sitting through. Some people have left. I think it must have been a little bitter, so they left. So but never mind, they've heard the larger part of the law. So once again, thank you very much, and please go to the next room for dinner. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to see, I am losing my head. I have to thank Vrinda for coming here, for regaling us with all those jurisprudence escapades and all, it really excited us. And I think we would be better citizens after this, because as she says, don't rely on the courts for everything. There is such a thing as a public protest. But I don't know how many people will turn up if we call for a protest tomorrow. I hope that all in this room will turn up. Thank you, Glenn, for your very, very incisive questions, and which Vrinda actually answered equally incisively. And thank you for all the questions that were raised this evening. Thank you very much.